Hey everybody, hope you all are doing well. This is some commentary I made about Miasma back in probably around 2023, I guess. It was quite a while ago. Probably one of my favorite maps ever made, so commentary will really start about 25 seconds in. I hope you enjoy. I'm going to start out with some low-hanging fruit for me, just things I can knock out real quick as far as playing Safeless is concerned, and one of these is definitely one of my absolute favorite maps, which is Miasma, which is made by Tourniquet, which is a very sort of sprawling tech base in some sort of green-ish planet or something like that I guess is incredibly smelly. So, but anyway, I guess the reason why I was drawn to this map so much as I once was when I originally played it back in 2016 was because it really reminded me of games like Super Metroid, which I kind of grew up with as a kid. Still have my cart, actually. I should probably break that out again. But it really just sort of lets you do kind of whatever you want at the start. You're given, like a bunch of different ways to go, and it's up to you to sort of forge your own path through this particular map. It's obviously nothing unique, I think, as far as Doom mods I've played, but this map does some things particularly well, which is why I guess I enjoyed playing it for as long as I have, even though it's only one map. It's probably one of the maps I've played the most out of all the PWODs I've actually sort of played and made demos of. But yeah, I guess the reason why is Tourniquet does a very good job of making it so that all the encounters, even though he has to kind of make things easy enough so you can sort of like, doesn't matter what weapons you have, you should be able to complete the encounters, because I assume that's a very sort of big challenge when making a map like this, where you have so many different pathways you can take. And you always have to sort of make sure the player is going to be able to handle them with the supplies that the player has available at the time. The fact that I think Tourniquet pulled that off so well in this WOD, and that's definitely one of the reasons why I played it for as long as I have. Not just because back when I used to play this map in multiple different ways, it was always fun, but in the fact that even though he had to do that, like put that kind of thought into, I guess, the design of this map, it never sort of falls into the trap of the encounters feeling incredibly similar or all feeling pretty easy. And the way he sort of gets around that, at least from what I've observed playing the map, is everything is sort of placed in secrets or something like that for the much more difficult fights, where it's like, if you find this, then I'll probably give you the supplies that you need to deal with it, but you might have a much more difficult time with a fight rather than you would if, you'd already been to other areas of the map and gotten more powerful weaponry. One fight that we'll see later is definitely the Mastermind fight with the Hell Knights and the Barons. That fight's pretty hard the first time you get to it, if you just go straight there. But at the same time, it's also very doable as well. And that's one thing that Tourniquet does very well in this map, where if you actually do find one of the secret fights, you're generally given the weapon that you require in order to beat it, but maybe, if you had something like BFG, it'd be much easier, but with the weapon, that you're provided, it's still a challenging fight. So that's definitely something that I really appreciate that Tourniquet implemented within this WOD. And there's a couple of other things I want to touch on too, sort of unique to different fights, which we'll get to as I get to those fights. So one of them especially will be the Green Skull Key. That fight isn't unique, but he does some stuff which I think is really effective and sort of touches on things that me personally I've done, as well as other authors have done, but maybe not to the same amount of success as Tourniquet has done here. But going back to this area, so something else that Tourniquet does in this WOD, which is really cool, is that every room you're in, basically you either return to it at least one time, or the area has multiple things within it which you can do. So, for example, this area right here, there's actually one path to go get the rocket launcher and do that fight. Another one is going to be a secret switch to get behind a cyber demon, which is in, I believe it's the red key fight, and then head on down to a secret BFG area. And then there's also a secret shoot switch in that area, which lowers a corridor, which allows you to go get the red skull key, if I remember correctly. So, and he does that kind of in every area of this map. And what that kind of does, at least in my mind, is it makes it so that you're still being given a lot of content, but you don't feel like you're going down individual paths to get to a fight, and then that path is just over. And the reason why that's significant in my mind is because there's a pretty big trope in challenge mapping or slaughter maps. At least, you know, there's some I can name off the top of my head, like in Slaughterfest 2012 you have the cannonball maps, which are all very fun maps, but they all sort of devolve into this layout design where, you know, there's 3 different paths or something like that, and at the end of each path is a key card. And that's a very common trope in slaughter maps that try to give you some kind of non-linearity. I guess another example would be, I think it's Sunder Map 18 does this as well, where there's basically just 3 paths, and at the end of each path is a key. And then after you get all the keys, you sort of just beat the map, sort of deal. Like, people have been doing that forever. And Tourniquet made this map in particular, which sort of, it's a sprawling sort of challenge map with multiple different paths, but you never feel like you're going down a path to get to a key card. And I really feel like that this sort of design really lends itself to that. Obviously there's a couple areas, like you'll see me later drop down into this area next to this archvile right here to get the silver skull key, and it's just, you know, that's going to be a fight for that key. But because the map, where it's placed, it's just like, oh, there it is. You don't really feel like it's the conclusion of one path within the map, so to speak. And that in and of itself is something really interesting that this map has done that I hadn't really experienced prior to playing it. So this area right here is obviously one of the secret fights that you can find the plasma gun in. And this particular fight is quite difficult, or rather, I don't know if it's difficult, it's just easy to die in. I don't know if that makes sense, if something could be easy, but also, I guess, easy to die at the same time and not be difficult. But that's kind of how this area sort of feels to me. Because, really on its face, you're basically just running around shooting imps with plasma, which is easy enough to do, but then at the same time, you've got all these sniper monsters sort of firing at you from up there, as you can see. So you've got like a cyber demon shooting at you and stuff, and a bunch of revs. And sometimes, obviously, because of, you know, Doom RNG and infighting, the cyber demon may just decide to kill you, or you could get unlucky and get like a deluge of Revenant rockets that decide to just annihilate you while you're dealing with the imps. So it's sort of a fight that deals with the slaughter trope of, you know, hammering your way through a bunch of imps, which happens all the time in slaughter maps to sort of pad things out and just to give you more stuff to kill. But at the same time, it's sort of like, it still has that aspect of danger where if you ever stop moving, then most likely the cyber demon or the rev rockets following you are just going to annihilate you. And from that perspective, this fight was a pretty big success, in my opinion. Although I will admit, when I was running this map in like January of 2017, I think, it did get a little bit obnoxious sometimes to die in that area, because, you know, you sort of do the same thing, and then sometimes, you know, the map will just decide that you're not going to survive this run right here, just because of the way, you know, the RNG the dice decided to fall that particular attempt. But overall, it's a really cool area just because of how it looks. It's a very unique aesthetic in this particular WOD. Like, you never really see another area which looks like that one. So it sort of becomes like a memorable fight for that particular reason. Which is something else that this WOD really does well, where all the sort of really secretive areas have a very unique aesthetic to them. So even though, you know, you're running through this mostly brown tech base, you find these areas that really break up the theme. And along with that, you know, you get to find all these sort of really cool goodies and areas, you know, along the way, which we'll also see here coming up in the cave fights. And something else, I mean, this is obviously, I guess, going to be a recurring theme in all the fights. So this fight in particular, just like the previous one, Tourniquet really sort of throws everything at you from all different angles and never really gives you a safe place to sit. So you're constantly always moving and you're not really camping at all in any of his fights in this entire WOD, which is very cool as far as I can tell. It's definitely a design that I've sort of taken to heart in everything that I've made, where I don't really want the player to be sitting in one area for too long. I would really either prefer the fight to be over pretty quick, which this WOD also does, or make the player move all the time and never sitting in one spot. Which, for me at the time, was a pretty new concept because I was playing older WODs like Sunder and stuff, which old Sunder's still a lot of fun, but it's definitely fights which are going to be, you know, sitting there for a couple minutes, sort of standing around with rockets or cleaning up a lot of stuff. And this particular map, you never really have to clean up, which I found to be very cool as far as, you know, maps I had played when I was starting out to play this game. Because I think I even played this map before I played Sunlust, so really all my experience was Sunder at the time. So it was a pretty big revelation for me when playing this particular WOD for that reason. So this is another example of what I was talking about earlier, where you have all these different rooms with all these different paths and everything that you go in each one. So it really sort of makes the map like loop around on itself, and you sort of are able to always go up to a different area in the room. And that's one other thing that's really cool about this map, is that there's hardly ever a place that you can see that you can't really get to or run around on. Like, obviously there's going to be, you know, the backdrops and stuff, which you just aren't able to get to because they're just there for the setting, you know, of the map. But generally, if you can run into a room, then odds are you can pretty much get to everywhere you can see in that particular room. So that's one other thing that I find that's really neat about this map. There's so much content in every single area, basically. So it makes it so that, I mean, the map isn't too big. Like, it doesn't feel like, you know, like I had mentioned previously, you're just running down a corridor and getting to one key and then you never revisit that place again. It really just makes the most out of every line that Tourniquet drew in this particular map. And that's one other thing that's interesting about his mapping style, because I remember in one of my mapping streams forever ago, Tourniquet said that he actually draws by hands all of his gradients and everything. I'm not sure why he does it, but that's something I've always done as well, and I've always sort of thought of it as, you know, there's a quote from Prometheus where they say, you know, God doesn't draw in straight lines. And that's part of the reason why I've always sort of done that. I mean, obviously, now with all that I'm obsessed with, you know, 90-degree angles and stuff, it's almost like me remembering that, you know, if it's metal, then it's sort of like, you know, Zoolander, you know, turning left at the end of the movie. It's, you know, it's a big revelation for me. It's like, oh, I can draw on 45-degree lines, but I pretty much still never really use the stair builder tool, and I'd be curious to know why. I guess Tourniquet doesn't. I don't know, the map feels more like, I guess, more personal or something, not using stair builder, rather than just like some sort of mechanical activity that you do to like shit a map out or something like that. At least that's the way I approach it. But this particular area, like, even though it's a secret area, it's so big. You know, it has multiple encounters, and it plays differently mostly for the entirety of this area. So like at the beginning you had that aggression with BFG to make it through and kill all these vials, and then you have this sort of slower section where you have to hit a button and you're stuck in that, you know, smaller area. And then here it's obviously complete BFG aggression the entire time. But this fight in particular does something really unique that me and I think I've seen a lot of other people try. It sort of reminds me of Fimmel maps where you have control over all the progression in a certain area. And what I mean by that is you can sort of release monsters as you please, so to speak, and then, you know, sort of deal with them all, you know, at your leisure to sort of, you know, balance the difficulty of a certain area. And in this particular map, the way it was implemented, it never really feels free. It's either front-loaded enough, as it is in the first phase, where you have to deal with the revs on one side and the Alliance on the other with pain elementals, or it's this bit where you have to deal with cyber demons and, you know, the 4 archviles and everything, and it's quite surprising the first time you play this area, you know, like what's being thrown at you and stuff. And so, to me, it's really interesting how Tourniquet designed this such that it's a lot of fun to play everything, you know, by itself, but it's also even more fun, obviously, to just release everything and then just blow it all up, essentially. And that's something that's pretty hard to do, to sort of be able to find that balance when designing these particular areas like that. Like I know for myself, like Event Horizon, Map 32, that map was designed completely with that design in mind, where you can sort of, everything you can sort of decide how you want to deal with it. If you just want to like run through the map and then return later and blow stuff up with BFG, you can. But it's so easy in certain areas that I don't know if I have as much fun as I do playing it one at a time. Whereas with this particular fight, it's like I always have fun playing it no matter what. So from that perspective, I always really appreciate this particular area for that. And plus it just looks really cool, because, you know, you sort of get to go down into the mountains and sort of see that everything is sort of made up of all this like green rock, you know, and maybe like gemstones or something, I don't know. But it's definitely really cool. And here's another example of, you know, obviously returning to different areas and then there's a fight or something in it. And it's cool because this area is just, you know, a path. You know, there's nothing else really going on in this area, but still had to find a way, you know, to add something in here to surprise the player. Because I know it kind of surprised me the first time. It's like in Doom, you never really, at least I don't, expect the floor to drop. It's like, it's sort of along with those ambushes whenever people use like a door, and then you go to open it, but then it releases monsters behind you, and then there's a switch behind the monsters, you know, in their closet, which then opens the door. It's sort of always one of those types of ambushes that I never end up predicting whenever it's used. And I specifically remember that happening to me the first time I played this map, when I returned to that area. So yeah, just, you know, Red Skull key right there, obviously, you know, looping back over on itself, and then you can just decide, it's like, oh, now is maybe the time I want to get this Silver Skull key here. So, and these health potions on the right, I don't know if this was done on purpose, but it's fun to me whenever I see maps sort of lay these health potions around, which interfere with Lost Souls, because obviously, I don't know about Z-Doom, but, you know, like in CL9 and CL2, if a Lost Soul attacks you, it'll get blocked by an item. If it tries, you know, attack over, it'll just stop moving. And so, this fight is always one of those I remember where it's like I never pick those up, just to sort of make it so that when I run by them, I know I can use them as cover, so to speak, from the Lost Souls to prevent them from hitting me as often. And this happens again previously already in this demo, where in that the cave towards the green skull key, there's an area where you can pick up 100 cells where all these elementals like raise up, and there's all these health potions around, and I sit in that area specifically to protect myself from Lost Souls when I start firing rockets after killing everything with BFG. So I always really appreciated this area for that reason. Like I said, I don't know if it was actually done on purpose, but I think it's a fun little thing that occurred just because of how the items were placed. So this area is another really cool example of getting, you know, a lot of mileage out of your map, because this fight right here, obviously there's a secret fight that you can jump over there to get to deal with, you know, the Mastermind, the Hellknights, and the Barons. But in this hallway, there's like 4 different fights, sort of, I guess, like 2 different incidental areas, and then 2 sort of mid fights. You know, one for the SSG in the beginning, and then, you know, you've got this fight, which is just, you know, to get to the secret fight. So it's sort of like, you know, once you find a key, then Tourniquet sort of guarantees that, I guess, you'll have a weapon. At which point he says, okay, you're going to be ready, I guess, to jump over into this Mastermind area. So I'm curious if that was an actual, like, you know, conscious design decision with this particular map. Where it's sort of like you have to find a key first, and then that will also guarantee you have rockets or something like that. And then you'll be allowed to deal with this fight right here. Because, yeah, I don't know if if the rockets are actually down in that Mastermind area, so... And speaking of the keys, there's several switches in this map as well, so it's like, you don't have to always max it. Like, sometimes when I play this WOD, I'll just take certain paths and then just go to the exits, because Tourniquet's like, you know, it says, hey, once you get the red key, you're basically good to go. Like, everything else is completely optional. So it really adds to, you know, the whole sort of exploration side to the map, where you're not sort of forced to go down every single path. Tourniquet basically makes everybody's experience unique the first time they play the WOD in that regard. And that's certainly some things that I've done in some maps, like Zolbase's map 2 is like that, where, you know, I guess most people find the red key and exit the map, but then if somebody happens to find the blue key, then they might just end up skipping the red key entirely or something like that. So that's definitely a direct inspiration from this particular map in that regard, where it's sort of like, hey, you know, depending on where you go, you know, I'm going to prevent you from going here, or you can just go ahead and leave the map, but it will be much harder later, obviously, because you won't have BFG. So it's sort of like a trade-off in that regard. I remember reading comments from different people in thread where they were talking about, oh yeah, I made it to the end with only plasma, and it was a pretty beastly fight. And then it's like, you know, or you can get BFG, and then, you know, it's still pretty hard. I mean, it's not free or anything, but then it's, you know, it's much easier because you sort of are rewarded for finding everything in the map. Obviously, you can see everything in the map as well as you run around things. Like, you're always, like, looking into different areas of the map, and other areas are obviously always looking out into certain areas that you're here now. So it's sort of like, you know, if you can see it in this map, then you can most likely get there. There's even, like, I think one secret coming up where you teleport back to the very start of the map, like you running around a building which contains a secret or something like that, like right at the beginning of the map. So it's really neat how the map sort of winds around itself, and you're always able to sort of see everything where you're going to go next or where you've already been and stuff like that. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of infinite height nonsense to hit that switch. Otherwise, you'd have to run around on that ledge to hit that. I specifically remember Archie telling me about it when I was streaming the map. He's like, you can probably just hit that switch from down there. And it's like, oh yeah. I also have to thank Archie for the, as an aside, the Sunder Map 14 cheese, where you just sort of hit that button through that pole in that fight just prior to where you get BFG in Sunder Map 14. So you just skip the entire fight. That was also an Archieism right there. But here's another example of an area where you just sort of reuse, or you're able to like run around in and stuff and find stuff. Just getting a whole lot of mileage out of it. You know, running around the slime and killing all the specters. Even though it's kind of like a John Romero-ism that I really can't stand, to be honest. I don't really mind it in this map, I guess, because, I mean, no matter what, I would have jumped down there anyway to explore it. So, it's not like it's just like a small little trench or something like that that has nothing in it. Oh, I guess I never really noticed that you could see that arch file sort of moving around at the top of that pillar. Oh, I should probably update the map on new games, I guess. But yeah, here's the secret fight, which I think is right at the start of the map. I don't know. I should just look at the auto map, I guess. But I'm too lazy to reach for the tab on the keyboard. But this is just another interesting little sequence right here, where obviously more power-ups blocking all the Panelemental's Lost Souls. Like, that one I never really liked for that reason, because it's like that Panelemental just doesn't do anything, because all the Lost Souls just get blocked. And it's kind of like just sort of, you know, going, oh, well, I guess I'm just dead, sort of deal. I mean, it's never really meant to be that particularly difficult in this area. It's just kind of like an optional thing that's just sort of fun to find, is the way I always thought about this area. Except for this arch file. This arch file is going to be a huge pain in the ass. Like right here. I got pretty lucky with all the imps deciding to actually hit the vial each time it was starting to attack me. Yeah, one other cool thing this map does as well is hide like large ammo pickups and secrets, like in that one. So if you were to use BFG, for example, a lot of it in that green skull key fight, then obviously you wouldn't be able to use it normally if you were to come straight here. So you wouldn't have any cells, and there's no cells in this arena either, so you might as well just have rockets. But it's interesting that, you know, Tourniquet decided to make all these other secrets, which you can sort of just find in the interim, which have, you know, cells and stuff in them to allow you to make other areas of the map easier than they normally would have been. So, and that's a fun thing to do in several maps, where you sort of are given, you know, something like SSG or something like that, but there's also rockets in the map. But if you don't find any secrets, then, you know, you have to decide where you want to use rockets and sort of rely on your SSG throughout the entire map. But there's a lot of secrets in the map, which then, you know, sort of let you do nothing but almost fire rockets the entire time. And so you really just, you have to fall back on the SSG if you screw up, but really if you know what you're doing, then you should just be, you know, blowing everything up with rockets or plasma the entire time instead. Which I think is a really cool way to design a map, and is definitely something that I've done. Like, in Zolbases especially, every map, the SSG is basically optional. Well, except for map 31, but like in maps 1, 2, and 3, like, if you're using the SSG, then you're not beating it optimally. And that's definitely something I sort of took to heart, I think, from this particular map. Because this was the first time I really encountered a design of that nature. This fight has some goofy kind of... I don't know if it's cheese or just, you know, the way it was designed. I never really noticed that when I was testing this map ages ago, so... I think it's better for it, though. Sometimes cheese like that makes certain areas more fun. And just being able to blow up all these revs like that with 2 BFG balls, I don't think it really takes anything away from the fight, especially because you still have to deal with all these arch files and this Cyber Demon right here. Definitely a pretty unique area, because the whole idea of this part is you're killing monsters away, like, you know, in certain areas of the room. Which is why I didn't really ever run down here, for example, and hide around this pillar when killing all those Helmites and Barons. Because obviously if the vials start rezzing stuff, then all of a sudden your tracers aren't hitting all the vials, and it's easy to make this area get out of control, and you sort of become overwhelmed. It's something that I really like seeing in certain maps. Like Sunder Map 14 does that at the very start, in the cave. I think that map does it really well. It's pretty oppressive, obviously, because you only have SSG at the start, and obviously, assuming you're not doing the vial jump, to skip the entire start of the map as well. But you have to kill everything in a certain area in order to avoid the vials from resurrecting everything. And then it was a lot of fun seeing this particular map do that sort of same thing in the fights. And it's also something that I've consciously done. Like in the fight with the vials, it's sort of the red key fight in Dimensions Map 3 was specifically designed with that in mind, which is where, you know, like some arch vials at the very end, they spawn on one side, so if you play that fight, then it's obviously a better idea to kill everything away from where the vials spawn, so they're not resurrecting barons or something like that. And that was done basically with that sort of design in mind from this map with Sunder Map 14. And this fight's another good example of a fight where it has multiple waves, but you never really... It's pretty rare for me to see a fight like this, because you never have to hit a switch to continue the fights. The only thing you've done is sort of start the fights, and then you're pretty much pressured the entire time to deal with stuff on a timer. It's a pretty rare fight from what I've seen, like with this many transformations. Normally, like, I know with me especially, I really like using switches to allow the player to just sort of say, okay, now I'm going to deal with the next wave of monsters or something like that. Whereas this, it's like, it's always going to take a minimum of, you know, this many minutes or something like that to deal with the fights. And it does it very successfully as well. So, because you're always kind of like, maybe I want to save BFG to deal with the revs at the end and then sort of use rockets, you know, so I sort of spread my resources out. So I'm not just blowing everything up at the start and then waiting for it later, but then I don't have any cells for it. Which is also a good reason why there's not like carpets of cells everywhere here. And instead, Tourniquet sort of gives you some more cells like when the area transforms instead to get around that. So it's pretty controlling in that regard, but I think it pulls it off really well. And also it has the signature Tourniquet tower in this particular bit. So there's like, I don't know if it was just Tourniquet's thing to add like a tower in all of his maps, but I think in like a Nova 2 map or something like that, Tourniquet has a tower in one area that you see in the center of an arena or something like that. And then in his TNT Revolution map, he has a tower in one area, and then in altitude there's a tower you have to ride up, and in this map there's a tower that you have to ride up. So I don't know what it is with towers or something like that, but Tourniquet's just a really big fan of this setup, I guess. But I guess for the best, because I don't really see it used ever, like outside of Tourniquet's maps, at least from what I've played. I'm sure it is used by other people, but definitely notice it with Tourniquet's maps though, because he just likes this sort of idea so much. Finally get to go ahead and ride up this freaking thing and finish the map, I guess. And one interesting thing about this final bit is that as you're riding up this tower, there's a whole lot of two arch files on each floor, essentially. So he even went to the length, you know, to make sure that if you do kill things within this tower, then you're going to have a more difficult time than you otherwise, you know, would have if you do this, for example, where you make sure that you let everything leave the tower instead. It's also especially lucky that Cyber Demon didn't actually infight anything while it was on the tower, in order to avoid these vials resurrecting shit and then making it more obnoxious. Thinking of it now, I guess everybody would drop like 4 vials or something in here if you found BFG. I guess that's one thing you could... Although, I mean, I guess it kind of cuts in against the reward for actually finding BFG. Of making, you know, just the secrets making the map easier rather than the map reacting to finding secrets. And that's definitely something I'll get into, I guess, when I end up making a demo for Swim with the Whales, because that's a big sort of design decision in that particular map, which is that the secrets actually make everything easier. And the map is actually designed to be played without the secrets. But, yeah, really cool map overall. Don't really have anything else to say.